Good evening. My name is Len Foy, and I am a real estate attorney in Nashua, New Hampshire. I'll be providing some more biographical and contact information about me as this video progresses. But the subject of my video presentation this evening will be purchasing bank-owned property. So I always try to design these lectures so that they're readily understandable by people who have significant experience buying real estate and people who have no experience buying real estate. I'm going to try to keep this video segment brief, and for those loyal viewers who have been tuning in and who have been watching my videos and providing me with feedback and constructive criticism, you'll notice that I've been on hiatus, and of course it's been the holidays, and the holidays is just such a difficult time not only to do your Christmas shopping and other things, but just to really even stay on top of work. And so I've effectively been prevented from doing these videos, which I enjoy doing so much. And it's December 29th, so it's still December, and it's still the holidays, and I was determined to squeeze in one or two more videos for calendar year 2014. So, but again, as I indicated in my opening remarks, I try to design these videos so that you can jump in at any time, regardless of your experience buying or selling real estate, and follow along and hopefully come away from this presentation with useful information. So, when you're buying real estate, you can buy real estate. Of course, you're the person buying it, but who are you buying it from? Or what are you buying it from? Well, you can buy real estate from another person. You could buy it from a group of people. You could buy real estate from a family, from family members. You can buy real estate from a trust. We'll talk about that. You can buy real estate from a company or a corporation. You can buy property from the United States government. You could buy it from the Department of Housing and Urban Development. I've seen that. You can buy it from the Department of Veterans Affairs. I've seen that. And of course, you can buy a property from a bank. And when you're buying property from a bank, typically what you are doing is you are buying property from the bank that foreclosed on the loan that they made to the prior owner of the property which you are purchasing. And that's confusing enough. But suffice it to say, and I think this will probably be a familiar concept to most people watching this video, if you borrow money to buy a home and you don't pay the loan or you don't pay the bank, then you will lose the property to the bank. And so what the bank then does is the bank turns around and resells the property in the open market. And that's a process that can take quite some time. So, and that's basically where we begin this video presentation. You are in the marketplace, you are looking for a home to buy, you have found the home that you wish to buy, and it just so happens that this property is owned by a bank. We're going to try to offer up, or I'm going to try to offer up a few tips, if you will, for people who are currently in the marketplace and who may be under contract to buy property from a bank, or who may be considering it. What are the advantages? Let's talk about advantages and disadvantages. The advantage to buying a property from a bank is, there are several. I would say most prominently, it's part fact, part fiction, but I think that people feel as though that they will get a better deal if they buy a property from a bank. And I would say, by and large, that's probably true. Certainly banks have advisors, they have a real estate agent, they have attorneys, but because banks are bureaucratic corporations, they don't have they are not as adept as individual sellers might be, and there certainly have been many instances, many transactions that I personally have worked on where I felt that the bank was not selling the property involved for as much as they could sell it, or certainly as much as I would sell it for if I were selling it. So banks, I think, can fairly be accused of not completely understanding the marketplace that they're in, and banks have periodically sold properties for less than their fair market value. That's something that banks have done, and so there are people who scout out bank-owned properties in the hopes that they will be able to purchase that property for below its fair market value. Unfortunately, for people inclined to do that, of course, there are many people out there who hold this point of view, and so certainly you are all in competition with each other. So it's not as though there's just one or two people walking around with this special knowledge. This is a commonly held belief, and so I think that bank-owned properties become the target of many purchasers who are hoping to purchase the property involved for below fair market value. So I guess that's a starting point, and I say part fact, part fiction, because I've seen many instances where banks are asking too much money for the property involved for the same reason. They don't understand the market. So sometimes it works against potential buyers, and sometimes it works against potential buyers, and of course against the bank, because when you're asking too much for a property, it does nothing but sit. What are some of the other advantages to working with a bank? Well, there aren't that many. I mean, I think that certainly there are opportunities for you to get a better deal, and we've talked about that a little bit right in this video. I think for cash buyers, there are some advantages. Working with a bank can be a bureaucratic process. Never mind the bureaucracy of working with your own bank if you're actually getting a loan to buy the property. Cash buyers, however, are at a bit of an advantage because they actually do not need to satisfy the requirements of their lender. So, again, I'm still working on the advantages of buying a bank-owned property. Let's say that we had a bank-owned property that required a significant amount of remediation, repair. I don't want to say restoration because we're not going to restore a property before we sell it, but there are some properties that are in such rough shape that they are simply unsaleable to a buyer who is utilizing mortgage financing, which just means that if you are going through a bank to get a loan to buy a property, your bank will look that property over and make sure that it meets minimum standards of, that it's in decent shape, that it's not falling down. A lot of bank-owned properties are in a state of disrepair because they were neglected, sorely neglected by their prior owners, who may have been in the midst of financial problems, marital problems. They may have abandoned the property. We may have frozen pipes. The property may be in a terrible state or condition. People who are utilizing a mortgage company to try to buy a home are probably not going to be able to buy homes that are this far gone. A cash buyer, however, would, because they only need to satisfy themselves that the property is worth buying. And if you are a cash buyer and you are looking at a property that's very, very far gone like this, and when I say very far gone, I don't want to be dramatic. I mean, if it's collapsing, then it's not worth buying, then nobody should buy it. But I'm talking about properties that will need $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 worth of work before the owners can move in. And now there are what are called rehabilitation loans, and we can talk about those probably in another video segment. But a rehabilitation loan is a pathway for a buyer to purchase a property like this in a state of disrepair, to utilize mortgage financing, and to set aside some money within their loan to fix the property up before they actually take occupancy. But by and large, if you are a cash buyer of a bank-owned property that is in need of significant repair, then you are at an advantage because you are not in competition with a lot of other buyers that may be utilizing mortgage financing. The rehabilitation loan that I spoke of a few moments ago is not a rare product, but I don't see too many of them, so it's not something, there aren't a ton of people walking around looking to do that kind of a loan. It has to meet people's sort of special needs and special circumstances, so it's somewhat uncommon. So those are a couple of the advantages, and there are certainly more, but I almost think it's important to pay attention to some of the disadvantages. And I would say the disadvantages of purchasing a bank-owned property very, very quickly, briefly, would be you find that the bank can be inflexible. Not just about the things that we're all inflexible about, like, when are we going to close and what's the price of the property. They're just inflexible in terms of the way they operate. So if we send something over to the bank looking for an extension or looking to revise the contract or looking to open a dialogue about an issue, it doesn't go to the president of the bank, of course. It goes to a department within the bank, typically to what's called an asset manager. That's somebody that's been assigned this property to manage until it's sold or even after. So after it's sold and up until closing. So if we're dealing with Citibank or JP Morgan or Wells Fargo or one of your major banks or financial institutions, typically what that means is that any requests that we make, any modifications or amendments that we want to make to the contract, any changes that need to be made, any updates or developments, curveballs, wrinkles, those things all have to be brought to the attention of the asset manager, who typically does not have sort of absolute discretion over what happens. So even he or she must report to some other governing board or some other governing body. So there's that frustration. So for people that are, for their own reasons, more inclined to deal with sort of instantaneous communications, I make a request and I get a response, I need a modification, it gets modified, I get a yes or no answer. Dealing with banks can be very frustrating. We don't have the level of dialogue that we would like to have. If I'm representing a buyer, I'd like to be able to pick up the phone and call the seller's attorney or the seller's agent and have a brief 5-minute conversation about an issue that needs to be resolved or addressed. When we're dealing with banks, we just don't have that kind of flexibility. We can't have those conversations. I typically have to send an email and await a reply or send a letter. So a client will often call me and say, well, I need to move the closing date out a couple of days because something has come up, I've got to make a business trip, I've got to do something. And it isn't just as easy as me reaching out and picking up the phone and saying to the other attorney, I need to move the closing date because my client's in this predicament. And so everything becomes more time consuming and more involved, and ultimately creates stress and anxiety and uncertainty because nobody knows where we stand, because things are always hanging and pending and we're always waiting. So there's that disadvantage. Of course, dealing with banks can just be periodically unpleasant. If you buy a property from a person or from a family, there are many little things that get attended to along the way, maybe behind the scenes in a way that we don't even notice. With banks, there's much more of a sense of pushing off these tasks onto the realtors, onto the buyers, onto the attorneys. So dealing with a bank, can be very difficult because a lot of the little things that we like to see get taken care of along the way and that happen in many cases behind the scenes don't get taken care of, and they fall into the buyer's lap to be taken care of. So if you are a buyer and you are considering purchasing bank-owned property, I think you should just be aware that there are definitive advantages and potential disadvantages associated with that kind of a transaction. And I think that, the saying is that knowledge is power, and forewarned is forearmed. As long as you know going in that this is the landscape that you'll be placed upon, and you have a level of awareness that this is what you can reasonably expect, good, bad, and otherwise, then I think that then at least you go into the transaction informed of what the experience is likely to be like. The greatest advice that I could offer potential clients is that if you are considering purchasing bank-owned property, that you should retain an attorney, and I hope you'll retain me, to review the contracts very carefully. So these would be, I would place this under the category of traps for the unwary, potential pitfalls. have an attorney of your choosing review the contract. That would be my first piece of advice. Purchase and sales agreement with a bank is unlike other purchase and sales agreements. Most purchase and sales agreements range anywhere from 5 to 10 pages in length. They are not densely worded. They are not filled with legalese. They are, in many cases, drafted for laypersons, readily understandable, written in plain English. Contracts to buy properties from banks can be 20 or 30 pages, single-spaced, filled with legalese. Sometimes it's written by an attorney or law firm located on the West Coast, because that's where a lot of our major banks are. And so even the jargon, even the diction, the terminology, it's all different. On the East Coast, or in the Northeast, we refer to mortgages by their sort of classic term of mortgage. In California, they're called deeds of trust. So you'll see references to deeds of trust, and you'll see other references in these purchase and sales agreements that'll not only be foreign to you, they may be foreign to your attorney. So it's imperative, I think, that if you are purchasing a property from a bank and you are being presented with a 25-page contract and being asked to sign it, that you have an attorney of your choosing sign that document. An attorney of your choosing review that document before you sign it, excuse me. The other important piece of advice that I can give you, make sure you have your attorney review the deed. Now, when you're buying real estate, it's not uncommon in the hustle and flow of the transaction that you sign meaning the buyer signs the purchase and sales agreement. Their attorney does a title search. A million other things happen along the way. All the bells, all the whistles. The closing gets scheduled. You arrive at the closing. The closing attorney hands you your documents to sign. Here, sign this, sign that, sign this. The deed, which is arguably the most fundamentally important document of the batch, of the lot. The deed is actually a document that isn't necessarily even brought to the attention of the buyer because the deed is signed by the seller. So oftentimes the buyer will be buried up to their eyeballs in documents, signing away, and the deed gets nondescriptly, nonchalantly handed to the seller to sign. And the seller goes ahead and signs it, the closing attorney notarizes it, and it gets filed away. Sometimes the real estate agents will ask for a copy. I know of one real estate firm where the agents, as a matter of their training and protocol, will ask to review the deed at closing to check for typographical errors, errors regarding meets and bounds, names being misspelled, but they're the exception and not the rule. And in a lot of closings that I've heard of, and even a couple I've been involved with, the realtors haven't necessarily found mistakes, but they've raised excellent questions. Questions that got everybody at the table thinking about names and spelling and this issue and that issue. So I would say if I were advising a client who was buying a piece of property, I would say, yes, look at the documents that you're signing. We'll look at them together. I'll look at them too. But look at the deed. Is it right? Are the names spelled correctly? Are the lot lines accurately represented? Do we have spelling errors? Is it sloppy? I mean, I've had situations where deeds have been presented to my clients where there's been a cross out, an initial, and I've insisted that the document be done correctly. That is a document that will be recorded at the Registry of Deeds, so that anybody who is curious about your real estate activities can jump on the Registry of Deeds website and they can look up your deed by simply entering in your first and last name. And do you really want a document to appear on their screen that looks like it was prepared by amateurs? Misspellings and scribbles and initials and crossouts and handwritten language. I'm not trying to be judgmental. All attorneys have handled deeds in this condition by necessity or expediency or whatever the considerations at the time were. But it's not the right way to do it, in my opinion. And the deed, again, most of these documents will wind up in a dustbin or a shredder or an oven. and they'll be incinerated. But the deed is a document that lives on. The original is often returned to the buyer of the property. A facsimile of it is recorded and is viewable online. So that document essentially has permanency. So, but I digress, and I didn't mean to. The reason why I even got into this, train of thought, was because if you are buying a property from a bank, you are more likely, at least initially, to receive a deed that has errors. Why? Because it was prepared either by a bank or it was prepared by a law firm that does nothing but work for banks, which means they do hundreds, maybe thousands of transactions at any given time. And these documents just do not get the review and analysis that they are deserving of. And so I have seen many deeds come over from attorneys representing banks that are just wrong, that have the name of the bank spelled wrong, the name of the buyer spelled wrong, the name of the city spelled wrong, the street address wrong, the legal description is screwed up. It hasn't been signed properly. They send a copy instead of an original. There's just so many things that can be done wrong, and I've seen it happen many times. So if you are purchasing property from a bank, at a minimum, make sure you have an attorney not only review your purchase and sales agreement, but make sure that you have your attorney review your deed to make sure that your deed is correct. Because people will ask me all the time, what could hold up my closing if I turn around and resell this property? Give me a laundry list or a grocery list of some of the things that could screw up my closing. If I wanted to turn around and sell this property immediately, next week, tomorrow, today. One of the big issues are problems with deeds. Because typically if there's a problem with a deed, by and large, the way to fix it is to go back to whoever signed it in the first place and have them re-sign it. Now that would be hard enough if we just had to track down the couple, the married couple living in the next state that sold you your property. We can find them and we can get them to sign it. It happens all the time. But how are you going to go back to Citibank or JP Morgan or any bank or Wells Fargo? How are you going to, or Bank of America? How are you going to go back to a bank and get a document re-signed? Do you know how hard it is just to get it signed in the first place? I can only imagine how difficult it would be to have it re-signed, or as we say in our business, re-executed. So I wanted to throw out a few tidbits because I have to say that about buying a bank-owned property, because I have to say that in my travels, and this is anecdotal, a few years ago it was all bank-owned properties. This stuff comes in waves, and I've seen the waves and I've seen the cycles, and it's fascinating to me. For a while we had a ton of short sales. Now we don't have that many. We have some, but not that many. But there was once a time when I felt like maybe 30–40% of the transactions that we were working on in any given month involved short sales. And then we went through a real explosion, a real uptick in bank-owned property because there was a ton of it. Because there were so many foreclosures. So there were so many banks that were foreclosing and reselling properties. That also has died down quite a bit. And yet, like anything else, I'm starting to see a resurgence. And I wonder if there's a lot of talk about what's called a shadow inventory. This is an inventory of properties, bank-owned properties, but they're properties that are not for sale. The banks haven't released them to the market yet. They're waiting for the market to get better. They're waiting for regulations to change. They're waiting. But yet these are properties that are ready to be sold. And once this little thing that the banks are waiting for happens, these properties will hit the market. And maybe those properties start to hit the market, trickle into the market as opposed to cascading into the market. So I'm just starting to see, and this is strictly anecdotal, a number of clients who are purchasing bank-owned properties. And of course, that kind of work never really dried up. It just, there was just less of it. So if in fact maybe things are changing and the market is sort of bracing itself or preparing itself for an influx, if you will, of bank-owned properties onto the market, which is going to result in sales and transactions and closings, then I thought it might be timely and topical for me to offer these remarks. Certainly, I haven't even really touched even the surface of this subject area. There's so much to cover, but I thought I would begin appropriately at the beginning by offering a few tidbits, a few tips, if you will, and my own personal perspective on advantages and disadvantages, both perceived and real. I know that we haven't scratched the surface. Maybe that's all we've done. But again, you've got to start somewhere, and I feel that we've started at the beginning. So my name is Len Foy. I'd like to end with a little bit of biographical information, if I might. My name is Len Foy. I'm a real estate attorney with an office in Nashua, New Hampshire. We do real estate closings in 4 New England states: New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Maine, and Rhode Island. I've been practicing law for just about 20 years. I've been handling real estate matters in all that time. My office has a concentration or a focus in real estate. I don't say specializes, because specialization is a term of art, and I don't want to mischaracterize my practice. But certainly I can say that real estate is the vast majority of what we do here. Real estate is my calling, and it's certainly my strength and my area of focus. We handle commercial and residential real estate transactions. I would say primarily residential, but we have certainly a respectable level of commercial business that we do, and I think we do it very well. And again, I've been practicing law for 20 years, and in all that time, I've been handling real estate. So that's my experience and my range and my level of expertise. You can find us. I'm going to give you all of our contact information. My phone number is area code 603-598-4030. I'm available on the World Wide Web at www.foylawoffice.com. My email address, and I would love to get an email from you, is lfoy@foylawoffice.com. And if you want to send me a fax, it's somewhat of not as I don't receive a lot of faxes, but I'd love to get one from you if it's your preferred mode of communication. Our fax number is 603-598-4020. Again, our phone number is 603-598-4030. I'm at the tail end of the holiday season, so I'm as worse for wear as anybody that's been running around buying presents and going to parties and entertaining and hosting and doing all of those wonderful things. But it was important to me to try to squeeze off one more video. Maybe I'll even get in another one in calendar year 2014 and try to keep our wonderful momentum going. Eventually, I will cover every subject. And again, I've been practicing law for 20 years. I've been a busy attorney throughout that time. And so I consider myself to be very experienced, very knowledgeable, very ethical, very adept, very skillful. And certainly, I hope that if you are buying, selling, or refinancing real estate in any of the states where we conduct business, I hope that you will call me. My name is Len Foy. I'm a real estate attorney in Nashua, New Hampshire. I hope that you have enjoyed this video presentation. If you are considering buying bank-owned property, call me, because we've only scratched the surface here. There's so much more to cover, but we just cannot cover it in the time allotted. Thank you. Have a wonderful holiday season, belatedly. Happy New Year, and thank you for watching my video.